folk with HD, even in the early stages of the illness, lose the ability or start to lose the ability to be flexible in their cognition. That means moving from one skill to another. It might mean that their priorities lie elsewhere from those individuals encountering them in everyday life. So I think it's really important to set this answer against that background. The other aspect of cognition, which again starts to affect an individual really, really early, is executive dysfunction. So that's the, if you like, the conductor of your orchestra, the chief executive of your company, the brain function that holds everything together. So lots of things will be thought of separately, and the individual with HD isn't losing those things at that point. But what's happening is the inability to organize oneself, the inability to attend to a number of things at once and think about the connections between them, that flexibility that we're talking about, the ability to think about judgment of risk, the ability to prioritize, the ability to forward think. So when you reflect on all of those skills, you can probably see where I'm headed. And when I am lucky enough to encounter individuals with Huntington's disease in the early stages, because unfortunately what seems to happen is that people are referred to us usually in the early to mid stages, people might have started to lose these skills at that point. And that's where you get these glaring omissions, if you like. Number one for me, right early on, is the ability to organize oneself. So that is things like answering the mail, debt, being able to manage a bank account, answering the phone, attending one's appointments, all of those kinds of things. And as an individual enters the world perhaps of transitioning from not being in employment to perhaps entering the world of benefits and the complexities that involves, we'll often find that people aren't able to juggle all of those things. So that's one of the glaring omissions, and that then has huge ramifications for how people manage in the community, because I'm thinking about a gentleman who has prioritized by purchasing himself a massive television screen, but actually has no food in the house, or is unable to maintain his property. So, and of course, he thinks that that's okay, but of course, we're actually wanting him to live his life and live his life well, and life is bigger than just a massive television screen. So what we've got to start to think about there is that if that individual understands that, we can work with them around setting goals to address some of them, which might mean with all of their executive function. So setting structure and routine, calendar appointments, reminders, does this person need a PA? Those kinds of things. But actually, the other thing that we need to think about here is that person might appear really cognitively intact, but actually what might be happening is that all the glue that's holding all of those separate bits together, all of those skills that still exist, is kind of falling through the gaps. And actually, it might mean that we need to question their capacity to understand the risks that they're placing themselves under. And as a therapist, as a family member, as a carer, whoever is listening to this, I think you really, really need to be aware of that, because that will then have implications for where you go next. So if the individual has capacity, if they understand what's going on, you can work with legislation and you can work with them just in the same way that you can work with anybody else. It might take a lot longer because you've got to take into account physical problems, fatigue, career, all of the other things that we know that happens in Huntington's disease, but you can do it. But if this individual is starting to lose the ability to be able to think through those things and think through the consequences, then actually you need to get a bit more savvy about documenting that and why that is. And capacity, when there's problems with executive function, is quite a skill, and you're probably going to need some support in that, in which case you do need to get your GP or your consultant or whoever's supporting you to help you with that.